David Katz, everybody, the former Assistant U.S. Attorney. David, good morning, and a lot to cover.
It's great. It's great to be with you. I was coming over the canyon, but we've had a lot of rain and mud, and I couldn't quite get to my video camera on time. I will by next week, but Tony came over and got it all working, and then I had the traffic over the canyon. But I'm here on the radio.
All right, well, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thank you for stepping up, Tony. And David, as usual, I'd love for you to run where you want on this. And as I say, our time is limited, so please, wherever you want. But I do want to ask you about this document thing. And if you think, and the fact that, I'm seeing in the chat, they appointed a special prosecutor for Trump and the documents. Will there be a special prosecutor for Biden? I think there is going to be already. So I wonder if you can speak to that and then move on.
Well, there's a special prosecutor now named Robert Hur, and he's a former United States attorney. So this would be the person who has the top job in one of the 90 or so offices around the country. This would have been the job that my boss had above me when I was Assistant United States Attorney. Not the same individual, but this is the title of the person actually appointed by the president. So this fellow Hur was appointed by Trump, and he's now back at a private conservative law firm. And Merrick Garland has liked this idea of having Republican appointed, especially Trump appointed, former U.S. attorneys or sitting U.S. attorneys handle these investigations because he thinks that it gives it a very nonpartisan look. I don't know if he's trying to impress the Republicans in Congress, but nothing he can do, Mark, can impress this group because this group is out for, they're out for Biden. And no matter what happens, no matter how impartial or nonpartisan the special prosecutor is, it's not going to make any difference to them. But I think Garland thinks it'll make a difference to the general public, the court of public opinion. Let me just point out that Trump and Sessions were not nearly so punctilious, were they? They had Mueller, who was an establishment Republican, looking into Republicans. They didn't go and appoint a Democratic U.S. attorney, did they, to look into Trump and to look into all of that? They had a Republican do that, and then they had a Republican bar monkey with the report before the public saw it to give the impression, no collusion, no obstruction. You remember all of that. But anyway, we've gone a different direction now with Garland. So there are actually 3 Trump-appointed U.S. attorneys. There's the one in Delaware who's looking into the son, Hunter Biden, whether he committed any tax criminal violations or whether Hunter Biden did anything, more nefarious than that. There's a U.S. attorney who's left over from the Trump administration. They had appointed this Chicago U.S. attorney who's left over from the Trump administration preliminarily to look into the so-called Biden confidential top secret papers. And now that they found a second and third tranche of papers in Washington, D.C., there's a full-blown special prosecutor. That's the Robert Hur fellow. So I hope that brings people up to speed. And, of course, the story itself is quite different from the Trump Mar-a-Lago story, because while it's possible that both Vice President Biden then and President Trump, when he was leaving, it's possible that both of them, when they left office, took papers by accident. It's at least possible. We have real suspicions that Trump didn't do it accidentally, but quite on purpose. But even if they both took them accidentally, of course, Trump then obstructed the investigation that ensued. He had people, spokespersons who it appears misled the Department of Justice. He played games. Biden did not do any of that. These were Biden's private lawyers who were moving in office, and they found the first tranche, and then they said, oh, my goodness, if we found papers in this first tranche, we better go look at everything. Look in his old office, look in his garage, look everywhere. And that's when they found these other 2 papers. They revealed this to the public. This was not hidden. About all you could say is that it was found a week before the election. It would have been a huge late October, November surprise had it come out a few days before the election. But I don't think anyone has yet pinned misconduct on Biden or any of his lawyers for that. But watch, of course, the Republicans who now control the House will say that this was all a huge cover-up. This was to avoid a late October surprise. But the papers were first found, Mark, in about a week before the election, And of course, they were found by lawyers. It had to go through the Department of Justice lawyers. It had to go through the National Archives. So it's not that strange that it wasn't revealed just a few days later before the election. But it was found before the election and not revealed before the election. That is true.
Yeah, you explained, though, the devil is in the details there, and the details actually are virtuous or more virtuous and sort of defend the timing a little bit. I think it's a bad look, of course, as you've said, well, first of all, one thing you said, which is so clearly the case, is that I don't know why the Democrats do this, but they do this virtue signaling thing where they appoint, like, we'll appoint one of your people, a politically motivated prosecutor to handle this investigation, where the Democrats, where the Republicans, they do none of that, as you suggest. I mean, it's a huge distinction, and they get, the Democrats, no credit for doing it. So as you also suggest, like, well, who are you trying to prove what to, Merrick Garland? Garland's been... I think he's something of a disappointment. I just think everything's moved so slowly, and I know everybody's saying, well, it takes time to put a case together. Really, how much time does it take? I think they're slow walking this thing. But, again, I don't know. That's why I'm so glad to be talking to you. When I say this thing, I'm talking about charges against Trump, charges against his people. I mean, this is a guy who engineered a coup against the U.S., and I'm just astounded that it's taken so long to pin something on him from a legal standpoint.
Well, Mark, this does have a political impact because it's going to look to an awful lot of people who want it to look that way. A lot of Republicans, a lot of whataboutism people, they're going to say everybody does it. Everybody makes this mistake. One of the big arguments was they have these bright red markings on them, and they're in special envelopes, and they showed them. That was Exhibit A to the search of Mar-a-Lago, right? And the idea was that even someone who doesn't like to read like Trump, he would see the bright red markings and know they were classified. Well, presumably, like Biden leaving the vice presidency would have seen those clear red markings. Now, my own thought about it right now, and I'm just speculating, is that staff pulled that thing together. There's a lot of people who helped with his move and so forth, and that Biden may really not have seen those things. I tend to believe that Trump cherry-picked those things. But like one impact right off the bat is I thought that this case might be part of the January 6th insurrection case, and it would be another bunch of counts that he also did what he did to take the documents from the White House and other places in Washington to Mar-a-Lago. Now, I'm not so sure that those two would be charged together. I think it's just too likely that Trump will have the defense, no, they were boxed up. I never really saw them and went through them till I got to Mar-a-Lago. If that's true, there's maybe not venue in Washington, D.C., of what Trump took out of the White House. If he didn't know about it until Mar-a-Lago, no matter what he did, then he's going to be in the Southern District of Florida, presumably for venue, maybe back in front of his, hand-picked favorite U.S. district judge, the one we called Loose Cannon. But it's going to be before somebody in Southern Florida. It would be a whole different jury. It would be a whole different take on it. If you take that one out of the equation and you just have January 6th, I shouldn't say just, I've always thought that was a compelling case. But when I was on the last time, some people wrote on your online there, they said, ask Katz. At first, they wanted to play the Katz music. Remember, I used to have What's New Pussycat in the Year of the Cat. They wanted the cat music, and they wanted you to ask me, when are they going to indict Trump, for God's sake? I still think that they're going to. I still think that they're going to, but if you were an odds maker, we don't like the people who gamble on sports, and we don't like the people who gamble on politics. But if you want to gamble on politics, it's less likely that there'll be a case brought against Trump because of the whataboutism. Everybody does it. Biden did this with some of his papers at 3 different places. And then you're back with January 6th, which, again, I think is a compelling case. And people are thinking maybe the Georgia case will go forward. If the Georgia case really does go forward and it ends up in anything other than acquittal, then I think the feds would back off. It shouldn't be that way. They have the right, under the way we've interpreted double jeopardy, to charge a person for very similar acts, both in state court and federal court. But if you can imagine this thing going first in Georgia and Trump or Trump's top minions not being convicted of anything, I think that would also put the kibosh. So politically, this has been good for Trump, and Trump has, in fact, been gloating on his little media thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I just think that
I think I'm the most honest human being, perhaps, that God ever created.
Yeah, all right. I get that he's...
There's never been anything like this.
I get that he can gloat. I think something you just said, and we've got to wrap up with David Katz, but such a brilliant legal take always. I think something you just said was interesting in particular, and it was that if anything in the Georgia case, if they actually bring charges, which they likely will, is your suggestion, ends in anything but acquittal, they will likely not bring charges at the federal level. That's what you just said. I want to make sure that I got that right.
Anything but conviction. In other words, if it's an acquittal, if it's a hung jury, if it's dismissed or something. And let me just say this on that point really quickly. And by the way, next week I'm feeling good about being on video as well as sound. I do think it does present issues, no matter how strong the case is. And I think the case is very strong. And I certainly think that people like, from what I've heard of the evidence so far, Giuliani, Meadows ought to be charged down there. Find me 11,700 votes, meaning concoct them, and they have all of this evidence. It does present an issue with state and local prosecutors charging a president or ex-president. You think about it, some county down in Texas, right, charges Biden, charges someone like Obama. It does present a headache. It hasn't really been tested over the years. We haven't had a president or former president charged in local state court. We had Vice President Agnew charged, but that was in federal court, and he ended up pleading guilty in exchange for leaving office and not going to jail. It does present an issue, state and local prosecutors charging a sitting president or an ex-president. It just does. I think you have to deal with it if someone's guilty. If you shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, you ought to be charged by the local DA in New York because you just shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, whether you're Trump and President Trump or you're ex-President Trump. But it does present issues.
Okay, but David, last thing, I'm way over time here, but last thing, are you saying that if they get a conviction in Georgia, then they won't prosecute federally for anything? Coup?
If they convict Trump, I think it's unlikely that they would go there. They have a right to also then bring a federal charge. But I think that if anything happens but a conviction, if it's a hung jury, if it's very problematic, and of course the demonstrations down there would curl everybody's hair, even if you don't have any hair. What's going to happen and the impact on the country and the House Republicans being on the warpath. Having said that, I think it's a compelling case against Trump and his top lieutenants in state court in Georgia with Fani Willis, from what I've heard so far.
David, I wish we had more time. Let's talk next Thursday. Appreciate your takes also, and I thought that was a great one on the state case in Georgia, also the document stuff. David Katz, everybody. Thanks, David. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.